The letter trembled in Catherine Jones' hand as the stagecoach rattled westward toward Wheatland, Wyoming. After 3 weeks of travel from Boston, her nerves were as frayed as the hem of her once fine traveling dress. The dust-coated windows obscured the approaching frontier town, but she knew her future awaited just beyond a man she had never met, a cowboy who had written for a bride, and who now expected the accomplished, refined woman her references had promised. The references that weren't hers at all. "Last stop, Wheatland," the driver called, his voice cutting through Catherine's thoughts like a knife. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, sending her shoulder bumping against the wooden interior. A middle-aged woman across from her smiled kindly. "Nervous, dear." Catherine nodded, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Yes, madam, I'm to be married. Mail order." When Catherine nodded again, the woman patted her knee. "God bless you for your courage. The West needs good women. Good women." Catherine swallowed hard. Was she still that? The deception weighed on her conscience like lead, but desperation had driven her here. At 22, with no family left and no prospects in Boston after the scandal, the advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence. Seeking respectable lady for marriage. Established Wyoming cattle ranch. References required. She hadn't had references, not after what happened, but her friend Eliza had. The stagecoach door swung open, flooding the compartment with blinding Wyoming sunlight. Catherine blinked, gathering her meager belongings: one trunk, a hat box, and a reticule containing exactly $4.17. Her entire world. "Miss Jones?" A deep voice spoke from beyond the doorway. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped down from the coach. The man before her wasn't what she expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, yes, but there was a gentleness in his blue eyes that contradicted his weathered appearance. His dark blonde hair curled beneath a well-worn hat, and his tanned face suggested years under the open sky. "Mr. Irwin?" she asked tentatively. "Henry Irwin," he confirmed, removing his hat in a courteous gesture that seemed at odds with the pistol holstered at his hip. "Welcome to Wheatland." His eyes studied her, and Catherine felt her face grow warm. Did she match the description she'd sent? The photograph had been hers, at least, though taken in happier days. "You had a safe journey, I hope?" Henry asked, signaling to a boy to collect her trunk. "Yes, thank you," Catherine replied, searching his face for disappointment or suspicion. "It was long but uneventful." He nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "The ranch is about 8 miles outside of town. I thought you might want to rest tonight at the hotel, get your bearings before heading out tomorrow." His consideration caught her off guard. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Irwin." "Henry," he corrected with a slight smile. "If we're to be married, I reckon formalities can be set aside." Married. The word sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. This man was practically a stranger, yet in a matter of days she would bear his name, share his home, his life, possibly his bed. And it was all built on lies, of course. "Henry," she said, tasting his name on her lips for the first time. He led her toward a modest hotel on the town's main street, a 2-story wooden structure with Wheatland Inn painted in fading letters above its entrance. Wheatland itself was smaller than she'd imagined, a collection of wooden buildings fighting against the vast Wyoming landscape. A saloon, general store, sheriff's office, and church made up the heart of town, with scattered homes and businesses stretching outward. "It's not Boston," Henry said, noting her appraisal, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Catherine replied automatically, though in truth the rawness of it frightened her. Everything felt exposed here, with nowhere to hide. The hotel proprietress, a stout woman named Mrs. Finch, greeted them warmly. "So this is your bride-to-be, Henry, ain't she a picture?" Her frank assessment made Catherine blush. "The whole town's been waiting to meet you, Miss Jones." "The whole town," Catherine echoed weakly. Henry looked apologetic. "News travels fast in Wheatland, Mrs." Finch showed Catherine to a small but clean room on the second floor, chattering all the while about how fortunate Henry was to have secured such a refined Eastern lady, and how his ranch was one of the finest in the territory. A lucky man indeed, getting himself an educated woman with such glowing references, Mrs. Finch said. Why, Reverend Phillips was saying just Sunday how impressed he was when Henry shared those letters. Catherine's stomach twisted. The Reverend had read Eliza's reference letters describing a woman who could play piano, speak French, and manage a large household with efficiency. A woman who was not her. After Mrs. Finch finally left, Catherine sat heavily on the bed, burying her face in her hands. What had she done? The deception had seemed necessary in Boston, a way to escape ruin. But now, faced with the reality of this good man and the expectations of an entire town, the weight of her lie crushed down on her. A knock at her door startled her. Composing herself quickly, she opened it to find Henry standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "I thought you might join me for supper," he said. "Mrs. Finch sets a good table and you must be hungry after your journey." His kindness only deepened her guilt. "Yes, thank you," she managed, closing the door behind her. The hotel dining room was half full, and Catherine felt the curious stares of the locals as Henry led her to a corner table. He pulled out her chair with unexpected grace for a man with such large, calloused hands. "So," he began as they settled, "your letters told me quite a bit about your accomplishments, but little about you." Catherine's throat tightened. "What would you like to know? What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming as a mail-order bride?" His direct question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. She looked down at her plate, carefully choosing her words. "After my parents passed, I found myself with few options." This much was true. The advertisement seemed providential. Henry nodded, seemingly accepting this partial truth. "I'm sorry about your parents. Mine have been gone some years too." Their food arrived: roast beef, potatoes, and early summer vegetables. As they ate, Henry spoke of his ranch, the Circle I, which his father had established 15 years earlier. He had expanded it to nearly 1,000 acres, running several hundred head of cattle with the help of 4 ranch hands. "It's a good life," he said with quiet pride. "Hard work, but honest. The house needs a woman's touch, I'll admit. It's been just me since my father passed 3 years ago." "How did you manage the household?" Catherine asked. "Poorly," he answered with a self-deprecating smile. "Mrs. Garcia from town comes once a week to help with laundry and bigger cleaning, but the rest." He shrugged. "I'm afraid you'll find much to improve upon." She smiled despite herself. "I look forward to making it a home." His eyes, warm and sincere, met hers. "That's what I've been hoping for. Not just someone to cook and clean, but someone to share life with." The simplicity of his desire touched her. What would he say if he knew the truth? That she was not the accomplished lady he expected, but a disgraced shop girl running from scandal. Their conversation was interrupted by a tall, stern-looking man approaching their table. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as a man of means. "Irwin," he greeted coldly before turning to Catherine with an assessing gaze, "and this must be your Eastern bride." Henry's posture stiffened slightly, but his voice remained courteous. "Miss Catherine Jones, may I introduce Mr. Victor Caldwell, owner of the Lazy Sea Ranch neighboring ours." Caldwell took Catherine's hand, bowing over it with practiced elegance. "A pleasure, Miss Jones." "I trust Henry has mentioned me in his letters." "I'm afraid not," she replied, noting the flash of satisfaction in Caldwell's eyes. "No, how remiss." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Our ranches share a rather contentious boundary, water rights primarily. But business aside, welcome to Wyoming territory. We have precious few cultured individuals in these parts." Henry's jaw tightened. "We should let you get back to your meal, Caldwell." "Of course." Caldwell nodded to Catherine. "I look forward to seeing how a woman of your refinement adjusts to frontier life, Miss Jones. Perhaps you'll grace us with a piano recital sometime. I have a fine instrument brought from St. Louis." Catherine felt blood drain from her face. One of Eliza's references had specifically mentioned her musical abilities Catherine did not possess. "Perhaps someday," she managed. After Caldwell departed, Henry sighed. "I apologize for that. Victor Caldwell believes everything west of the Mississippi should belong to him, especially the creek that runs between our properties." Catherine barely heard him, her mind racing with the immediate danger of exposure. How long before someone discovered she couldn't play piano or speak French? Or manage a large household, Catherine? Henry's voice broke through her panic. Are you all right? You've gone pale, she forced a smile. Just tired from the journey, I think. He immediately stood. Of course, let me see you to your room. At her door, he hesitated, shifting his hat in his hands. I've arranged for the Reverend to marry us Sunday after services, if that suits you. That gives you 3 days to settle in and be sure that this is what you want. His consideration caught her by surprise. You're giving me a chance to change my mind. A marriage should be entered willingly on both sides, he said simply. I won't hold you to anything until you're certain. The lump in her throat made it hard to speak. Thank you, Henry. He nodded, then with unexpected gentleness, took her hand and pressed it briefly. Rest well, Catherine. Alone in her room, Catherine paced the worn floorboards. She should tell him the truth now, before the wedding, before the deception grew deeper. But what then? With no money and no connections, where would she go? Back to Boston, where disgrace awaited. Or try her luck in another frontier town, where a woman alone faced dangers she scarcely wanted to contemplate. Sleep eluded her that night, her conscience battling with survival. By dawn, she had made no decision, except to go through with meeting the Reverend tomorrow as planned. She would take Henry's offered 3 days. 3 days to either find her courage to confess or convince herself the lie could somehow become truth. Morning brought fresh challenges. Mrs. Finch insisted on introducing her to every customer who came for breakfast, each one mentioning some aspect of her supposed accomplishments. By noon, Catherine had met the doctor's wife, who was eager to discuss French literature, the schoolteacher who hoped Catherine might give piano lessons, and the mayor's wife, who wanted advice on managing household staff. When Henry arrived to escort her to lunch, Catherine was near tears with anxiety. Everyone's been very welcoming, she said, trying to keep her voice steady as they walked toward the town's only restaurant. They've been curious about you for months, Henry admitted. I'm afraid I may have spoken too much about your letters. They were impressive. Catherine swallowed hard. I hope I don't disappoint. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. I don't think that's possible. Lunch was a simple affair, followed by a tour of Wheatland. Henry showed her the general store where she could order anything the ranch needed, the small schoolhouse where children from miles around came to learn, and the church where they would be married. It was at the church they met Reverend Phillips, a kindly man with spectacles and a reassuring smile. Miss Jones, what a pleasure, he greeted her. Henry has told me much about you. Those references from Boston were most impressive, particularly the one from Reverend Thornton at First Presbyterian. I've long admired his writings. Catherine froze. Eliza had fabricated a reference from a Boston minister. She hadn't even known the content of all the forged letters. Yes, she managed. Reverend Thornton is highly regarded. Indeed, his sermon series on truthfulness was particularly moving. The foundation of all virtuous character is honesty and plain dealing. I have the collection in my study. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine. She felt Henry's eyes on her, and when she glanced up, she caught a curious expression on his face, not suspicion exactly, but something thoughtful. Shall we discuss the ceremony? Henry suggested, mercifully changing the subject. They spent an hour with Reverend Phillips going over the wedding service. Throughout the conversation, Catherine felt increasingly trapped in her deception, the Reverend's kind eyes and Henry's quiet attentiveness making every lie harder to bear. By the time they left the church, the afternoon sun was slanting toward the distant mountains. Henry suggested they watch the sunset from a hill overlooking town before returning to the hotel. The vista that greeted them took Catherine's breath away. Rolling grasslands stretched to the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun. Mountains rose purple and majestic in the distance, and the vast sky burned with colors she'd never seen in Boston: fierce oranges, delicate pinks, deep violets. It's beautiful, she whispered. This is what I wanted to show you, Henry said, his voice soft with pride. This is what we'll see every evening from the ranch. Every evening. The thought of so many sunsets stretching before them, sunsets she had no right to claim, made her heart ache. Henry turned to her, silhouetted against the blazing sky. "Catherine, before we go any further, there's something I need to say." Her heart began to pound. Had he somehow discovered her deception? "I want you to know that whatever your reasons for coming here, whatever you might be running from." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your past is your own. It's your future I'm interested in sharing." Catherine stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that those reference letters, they tell me what others thought of you or what you wanted me to think, but they don't tell me who you are." His eyes, earnest and clear, met hers. "And that's what matters to me, not what you can do, but who you are." Tears sprang to her eyes. "You don't know me." "I'm beginning to," he said gently. "I see a woman brave enough to travel across the country to a place she's never been. I see someone who looks at this wild land with wonder instead of fear. That tells me more than any letter could." "Henry." Her voice caught. "Those references don't matter to me," he interrupted. "I only need to know your heart, Catherine. The rest we can figure out together." The kindness in his words broke something inside her. The tears she'd been holding back all day spilled over. "You don't understand. I'm not who you think I am. I can't play piano. I don't speak French. I wasn't a lady's companion. I worked in a millinery shop in Boston until..." She stopped, unable to continue. Henry didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached out, gently wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Until what?" The tenderness in his touch was her undoing. "Until I was dismissed for something I didn't do. The owner's son, he made advances. When I refused him, he claimed I had stolen merchandise." Her voice shook with remembered humiliation. "No one believed me. My reputation was ruined. No respectable shop would hire me after that, so the references were my friend Eliza's. She worked as a governess for a wealthy family. When I saw your advertisement requiring references, she offered hers." Catherine couldn't bear to look at him. "I never meant to deceive you, but I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go." She waited for his anger, his rejection. Instead, she felt his hand, warm and steady, close over hers. "Look at me, Catherine." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "Thank you for telling me the truth," he said simply. She blinked in confusion. "You're not angry. Would it have been better if you'd told me from the start?" "Yes. But I understand why you didn't." His expression was serious but not condemning. "We all make choices when backed into corners. The question is what we do after." "I'll understand if you want to call off the wedding," she said quietly. Henry considered this for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you want to marry me, Catherine? Not because you need safety or security, but because you could see yourself building a life with me." The question caught her off guard. Could she? 3 days ago, Henry Irwin had been just a name on paper, a means of escape, but now, "I think I could," she admitted. "You're a good man, Henry, better than I deserve after my deception." "Then let's start fresh," he said. "No more lies between us. We'll take these next days to truly get to know each other, and if on Sunday you still want to say I do, then we'll build our life on truth." As the last light faded from the sky, Catherine felt something unexpected bloom in her chest, hope, and perhaps the first stirrings of something more. The following day dawned clear and bright. True to his word, Henry arrived early to take Catherine to his ranch, giving her a chance to see what would become her home before making her final decision. The journey took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers and sage. Catherine had never ridden in an open wagon before, and she found herself entranced by the vastness of the Wyoming landscape, so different from Boston's crowded streets. "That's Circle I Land," Henry said as they crossed a wooden bridge over a clear, rushing creek. "Everything from that ridge to those cottonwoods along the creek. Caldwell's Lazy Sea is on the other side." "It's so vast," Catherine marveled. "How do you keep track of the cattle?" Henry smiled at her question. "That's the job. We ride the boundaries daily, move the herds to fresh grazing, brand the calves in spring. My ranch hands and me. 4 good men, Tom and Joaquin, have been with me since my father's time. Will and Charlie came on last year." He glanced at her. "They live in the bunkhouse, about a quarter-mile from the main house. Mrs. Garcia comes from town once a week for the heavy cleaning, like I mentioned." As they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. The main house was larger than Catherine expected, a two-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance, she could see the bunkhouse Henry had mentioned. It wasn't grand, but there was a solidity to it that spoke of permanence and care. "My father built the house big, planning for a large family," Henry explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "It was just the two of us in the end, though." He gave her a tour of the property, starting with the barn where his prized horses were stabled, then the smokehouse, chicken coop, and vegetable garden that had clearly seen better days. "I'm afraid I've neglected it," he admitted. "Growing cattle is one thing, growing vegetables quite another." Catherine examined the overgrown plot. "It has potential. My mother kept a small garden behind our home in Boston. I helped her with it." "Then it's yours to do with as you wish," Henry said, pleased by her interest. The main house was both better and worse than she'd imagined. The rooms were generously sized and well built, with large windows that caught the morning light. But the interior bore the unmistakable signs of a bachelor's neglect: dusty corners, sparse furnishings, and a kitchen that clearly served function over comfort. "It needs a woman's touch," Henry said, echoing his words from the night before. "But the bones are good." Catherine ran her fingers along a well-crafted dining table that could easily seat 8. "Did your father make this?" Henry nodded. "He was a carpenter before coming west. Made most of the furniture himself." She moved to the parlor where a small bookshelf held a surprising variety of volumes: Shakespeare, Dickens, several books on cattle breeding, and a worn Bible. "You read Shakespeare?" she asked, surprised. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She taught me to value books." There was a touch of defensiveness in his voice. "Just because I'm a rancher doesn't mean I'm unlettered." "I didn't mean to imply that," Catherine said quickly. "I'm impressed, that's all." His expression softened. "I suppose we both have misconceptions to overcome." Upstairs, he showed her 4 bedrooms: the master, which had been his parents' and then his, a smaller room he'd used as a boy, and 2 that had never been used, intended for siblings who never arrived. "This would be our room," he said, standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, careful not to enter with her. "But I can sleep elsewhere until you're comfortable." The consideration in his offer touched her. "Thank you." They returned downstairs, where Henry prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. As they ate at the kitchen table, Catherine found herself studying his hands, strong and calloused from work, yet gentle in their movements. "Tell me about Boston," he said. "Not the society parts, but your life there." So she did. She told him about growing up as the daughter of a bookbinder, about helping in her father's small shop until his death from pneumonia when she was 18. She described her mother's struggle to keep them afloat, taking in sewing until she too fell ill 2 years later. And she spoke of the 2 years after, living in a boarding house, working at the millinery until the incident that had driven her west. Henry listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her life, not just the parts that affected him. "Your turn," Catherine said when she'd finished. "Tell me about growing up here." His story unfolded gradually: his parents' journey west from Pennsylvania when he was just 5, the hard early years establishing the ranch, the loss of his mother to fever when he was 12, and the partnership with his father that followed. "We were close after that, just the 2 of us against the world," he said, a distant look in his eyes. "When he died of a heart attack 3 years ago, it felt like losing my right arm. Took me a long while to find my balance again." "Is that when you decided to advertise for a wife?" Catherine asked. Henry shook his head. "No, that came later. About 6 months ago, I realized the ranch was successful, but my life was empty. I wanted what my parents had: a true partnership, someone to share the good days and weather the bad ones with." His honesty humbled her. "And you thought a mail-order bride was the answer?" "There aren't many unmarried women in Wheatland," he said with a slight smile. "And those who are have known me since childhood. Sometimes it's easier to start fresh with someone who doesn't remember every foolish thing you did as a boy." The afternoon passed in easy conversation as they continued exploring the ranch. Henry showed her the creek that formed the property line with the lazy sea, the source of the water rights dispute he'd mentioned. Caldwell claims his grandfather had rights to the entire creek, but the land office records show it as a natural boundary between properties, Henry explained. He's tried everything from damming it upstream to intimidating my hands when they bring cattle to water. That seems petty for a successful rancher, Catherine observed. It's not about water, not really. Caldwell wants my land. The creek is just his current strategy. Henry's expression darkened momentarily. But enough about that. I didn't bring you here to worry about neighbors. As evening approached, they sat on the porch, watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky. Catherine found herself surprisingly comfortable in Henry's presence, their conversation flowing naturally despite their short acquaintance. "What will people in town think when they discover I can't play piano or speak French?" she asked, returning to the reality of her situation. Henry considered the question seriously. "Some will gossip, that's inevitable. But most will come to know you for who you are, not who they expected you to be." And Reverend Phillips, he seemed so impressed by that fabricated letter from Reverend Thornton. "The Reverend values honesty, but he values redemption more," Henry assured her. "If you're worried, we could speak to him together before the wedding." The wedding. It was still difficult to imagine that in 2 days she could be married to this man. "Henry," she began hesitantly, "if we do marry, what do you expect from me? As a wife, I mean." He took his time answering, his eyes on the fading horizon. "I expect you to be honest with me, even when it's difficult. I expect you to try your best with the responsibilities of running a ranch household, though I understand you'll need time to learn. And I expect us to face whatever comes as partners." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "In return, I promise to be patient, to provide for you to the best of my ability, and to treat you with respect. The rest affection, love I hope will grow between us, but I won't demand what can only be freely given." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. No man had ever spoken to her with such straightforward respect. "I think those are terms I can agree to," she said softly. As dusk deepened into night, Henry lit a lantern and prepared to take her back to town. Standing in the yard, Catherine looked up at the house silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Despite its rough edges, she could see its potential not just as a house, but as a home. "Thank you for showing me your ranch," she said as he helped her into the wagon. "It's lovely." "It could be our ranch," Henry replied simply, climbing up beside her, "if you decide to stay." The journey back to Wheatland passed mostly in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Henry pointing out landmarks visible by moonlight. Catherine found her mind racing ahead, imagining mornings at that kitchen table, evenings on the porch, seasons changing across the vast landscape. For the first time since leaving Boston, the future didn't terrify her. At the hotel, Henry walked her to the door. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked. "I have business in town in the morning. I thought I might take you to lunch if you're agreeable." "I'd like that." He hesitated, then with careful deliberation, lifted her hand to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned, respectful, yet Catherine felt its warmth spread through her. "Good night, Catherine," he said softly. "Good night, Henry." Sleep came easier that night, her mind filled not with anxieties but with possibilities. Yet morning brought an unexpected complication. Catherine was enjoying a late breakfast in the hotel dining room when Victor Caldwell appeared beside her table, immaculately dressed despite the early hour. "Miss Jones," he greeted her with a tight smile. "May I join you?" Before she could object, he seated himself opposite her, signaling for coffee. "I understand Irwin showed you his ranch yesterday," Caldwell said, studying her over his cup. Catherine nodded, immediately wary. "Yes, it's very nice." "Nice is a generous description." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, did he show you the western pasture, the one where his cattle have been mysteriously dying?" Catherine felt a chill despite the warm morning. "No, he didn't mention that. No." "How curious." Caldwell leaned forward. "Perhaps he also failed to mention that the bank holds a significant lien against his property, or that last year's drought left him precariously close to ruin." Catherine kept her expression neutral despite her racing thoughts. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Simple concern for a newcomer," he replied smoothly. "It would be a shame for a refined Eastern lady to find herself trapped in a failing marriage to a failing ranch." His words struck at her deepest insecurities, but something about his eagerness raised her suspicion. "You seem very interested in Mr. Irwin's affairs. We're neighbors. In a community this small, everyone's affairs become intertwined." He set his cup down precisely. "I merely thought you should have all the facts before Sunday." "Thank you for your concern," Catherine said with forced politeness, "but I prefer to discuss Mr. Irwin's affairs with him directly." Caldwell's expression hardened slightly. "Of course. But should you reconsider your position, my offer stands." "Offer," Catherine echoed, confused, for employment. His eyes assessed her coldly. "A woman of your background would make an excellent housekeeper at the Lazy Sea. The wages would be generous, and you would be spared the indignity of marrying beneath your station." Catherine's blood ran cold. How much did he know about her, and what exactly was he implying about her background? "Thank you, but I'm quite content with my current arrangement," she replied, standing to signal the conversation was over. Caldwell rose as well, towering over her. "Consider carefully, Miss Jones. Henry Irwin is not what he seems, and neither, I suspect, are you." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Without waiting for her response, he nodded curtly and strode from the dining room, leaving Catherine shaken. She retreated to her room, mind whirling. Was there truth to Caldwell's claims? Henry hadn't mentioned financial troubles or dying cattle. But then, why would he? They had known each other barely 2 days. By the time Henry arrived to escort her to lunch, Catherine had worked herself into a state of anxiety. His smile faltered when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked as soon as they were alone on the street. Catherine hesitated. "Victor Caldwell approached me this morning." Henry's face darkened. "What did he want?" "To warn me against marrying you," she admitted. "He said your cattle are dying and the bank holds a lien on your property." For a moment, Henry was silent, his jaw working as if chewing on his response. Finally, he sighed. "I should have told you, not about the dying cattle. That's Caldwell spreading lies, but the bank loan is real enough." They walked slowly toward the restaurant, Henry explaining as they went. "Last year's drought was hard. I borrowed to buy feed and keep the herd alive. The loan is substantial, but the payments are manageable with this year's calf crop." "Why wouldn't you tell me this?" Catherine asked, hurt by the omission. "Pride, I suppose," Henry admitted. "And I didn't want to burden you with financial concerns before you'd even decided to stay." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm sorry, Catherine. I should have been more forthcoming." His apology was so sincere that Catherine's hurt began to fade. "We both have things to learn about honesty." "It seems so," he agreed with a rueful smile. "Did Caldwell say anything else?" Catherine hesitated. "He offered me a position as housekeeper at his ranch." Henry's expression hardened. "Did he? How convenient." "He implied he knows something about my past," she added quietly. "Something beyond what I told you." Henry shook his head. "Caldwell's playing games. He wants my land, and he'll use any leverage to get it, including trying to frighten off my bride." He reached for her hand. "Don't let him succeed, Catherine." There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the strength that touched her deeply. "I won't," she promised. Lunch was a simpler affair than planned, their appetites diminished by the morning's revelations. Yet as they talked, Catherine found herself increasingly drawn to Henry's straightforward manner and quiet integrity. Despite his omission about the bank loan, she sensed he was fundamentally honest, a rare quality in her experience. After lunch, they walked to the general store where Henry introduced her to the proprietor, a cheerful man named Mr. Bailey. "Mrs. Irwin-to-be," Mr. Bailey greeted her warmly. "Henry told me you might be needing some things for the house." "I was thinking curtains," Henry explained. "The windows at the ranch have been bare since my mother died. I thought you might like to choose some fabric." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Catherine by surprise. "That would be lovely." They spent a pleasant hour selecting heavy cotton fabric for the parlor and kitchen windows, with Henry insisting she choose whatever she liked best. The domestic task felt strangely intimate, their first shared decision about their potential home. As Mr. Bailey wrapped their purchases, the door opened, admitting Mrs. Phillips, the Reverend's wife, and several other town women. "Miss Jones," Mrs. Phillips exclaimed, "what perfect timing, we were just organizing your welcome basket." Catherine found herself suddenly surrounded by Wheatland's leading ladies, all talking at once about the wedding, the ranch, and their plans to help her settle in. "We thought you might give a piano recital at the Harvest Social next month," Mrs. Phillips continued enthusiastically. "Reverend Phillips mentioned you studied at the Boston Conservatory." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Another lie in Eliza's references, more elaborate than she'd known. Henry, standing behind the women, caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "That's very kind," Catherine managed, "but I'm afraid my musical skills have been exaggerated." Mrs. Phillips looked puzzled. "But your references were not entirely accurate," Catherine admitted, her heart pounding. "I can play simple hymns, but nothing worthy of a recital." A moment of awkward silence followed, the women exchanging glances. "Well," Mrs. Phillips said finally, "we're just glad to have you in Wheatland, musical or not. Heaven knows Henry needs someone to brighten that big house of his." The crisis passed, but Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. One lie confronted, countless more to go, but it was a start. As they left the store, Henry squeezed her hand. "That was brave." "It was terrifying," she corrected, "but necessary." They spent the remainder of the afternoon visiting other shops in town, Henry introducing her to what seemed like every resident of Wheatland. By the time he escorted her back to the hotel, Catherine's head was spinning with new names and faces. "One more day," Henry said as they stood on the hotel porch. "Tomorrow evening you make your decision, no pressure, no expectations." "What if I disappoint you?" Catherine asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I can't be the wife you need?" Henry's expression softened. "Catherine, I didn't advertise for a perfect woman. I asked for a respectable lady willing to build a life in Wyoming. You're here, you're honest now, at least, and you haven't run screaming from my bachelor household." His eyes crinkled with humor. "That exceeds my expectations already." His words warmed her from within. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it can be," he suggested. "Not easy, but simple. We work together, we're honest with each other, we build something good." As the sun set behind him, painting him in gold, Catherine realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to return to Boston or try her luck elsewhere. She wanted to stay in Wheatland, with this man who looked at her and saw not her mistakes or her past, but her potential. "I don't need until tomorrow evening," she said softly. "I've made my decision." Henry went very still. "And I would like to marry you, Henry Irwin." The words felt right as she spoke them. "If you'll still have me, knowing what you know." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I would be honored, Catherine Jones." He stepped closer, hesitantly raising his hand to her cheek. Catherine leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. "May I?" he whispered. She nodded, and Henry bent to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a passion. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Until Sunday, then," he said, his voice rough. "Until Sunday," she agreed. That night, alone in her hotel room, Catherine wrote 2 letters. The first was to Eliza in Boston, explaining her decision to marry Henry and thanking her friend for the references that, however deceptive, had led her to this chance at happiness. The second letter was to Henry himself. In it, she detailed every falsehood in her references, every skill she lacked, and every accomplishment that had been fabricated. It was a confessional, but also a promise, a commitment to absolute honesty between them from this day forward. She would give it to him after the wedding, she decided. Her final act as Catherine Jones before becoming Catherine Irwin, Saturday passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Mrs. Finch and the town ladies descended on Catherine, helping her prepare her wedding dress, a simple blue dress freshened with new lace, arranging flowers for the church, and providing endless advice about married life, some practical, some making her blush to the roots of her hair. Henry appeared briefly in the afternoon, looking uncommonly tidy in a fresh shirt to let her know he'd be staying at the ranch that night. "Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," he explained with a smile. "I'll see you at the church tomorrow." That evening, as Catherine sat alone in her room, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Finch holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "Special delivery from Mr. Irwin," the proprietress said with a knowing smile. Inside the package, Catherine found a leather-bound journal with a note tucked inside. "For new beginnings," the note read in Henry's neat hand. "Write our story however you choose." The simplicity of the gift brought tears to her eyes. Not jewelry or frivolous trinkets, but something meaningful, something that acknowledged her intelligence and recognized her desire to create a new narrative. Sunday dawned clear and bright, as if Wyoming itself approved of the match. Catherine woke early, too nervous to sleep, and watched the sunrise paint the eastern sky with promise. By 10 o'clock, Mrs. Phillips and several other women had arrived to help her dress. They arranged her dark hair in a simple but elegant style, secured with the blue ribbon that would serve as something blue for the occasion. "Every bride needs something borrowed," Mrs. Phillips declared, fastening a delicate silver brooch to Catherine's dress. "This was my mother's. You can return it whenever you like." The women's kindness overwhelmed Catherine. These were not just the social niceties of Boston drawing rooms, but genuine offers of friendship and community. In just a few days, Wheatland had begun to feel more like home than Boston had in years. At precisely 11:30, a wagon arrived to take her to the church. Mr. Bailey himself had volunteered to escort her, his wife having helped arrange Catherine's veil. "Henry's a good man," Mr. Bailey told her as they rode the short distance. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. You couldn't have chosen better." "I think perhaps he chose well too," Catherine replied, surprising herself with her newfound confidence. The church was packed when they arrived. Every resident of Wheatland apparently turned out for the occasion. Catherine waited in the small antechamber, her heart pounding as the organ began to play. Then the doors opened, and she saw Henry standing at the altar, tall and straight in a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes found hers immediately, and the wonder in his expression made her feel beautiful in a way no compliment ever had. The walk down the aisle passed in a blur. Before she knew it, Catherine stood beside Henry, their hands joined as Reverend Phillips began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The traditional words washed over her, but Catherine found herself focused on Henry, the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his gaze, the slight smile that seemed meant only for her. When the time came for vows, Henry's voice rang clear and true. "I, Henry James Irwin, take thee, Catherine Elizabeth Jones, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth." Catherine's own voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger with each word. "I, Catherine Elizabeth Jones, take thee, Henry James Irwin, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth." Henry slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he'd told her yesterday. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Phillips announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Henry. "You may kiss your bride." Henry's kiss was gentle but sure, a seal on their promises. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Henry Irwin, the church erupted in applause. The celebration that followed at the hotel was modest by Boston standards but heartfelt. Everyone in town seemed to have contributed something: Mrs. Finch's best tablecloths, Mrs. Garcia's traditional Mexican wedding cookies, Mr. Bailey's finest whiskey for toasts. Victor Caldwell was noticeably absent, though Catherine caught whispers that he'd been invited as a courtesy to a prominent citizen. "Probably for the best," Henry murmured when she mentioned it. "Today is for happiness, not old grievances." As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself drawn into conversation after conversation with townspeople eager to welcome her. No one mentioned piano playing or French, to her relief. Instead, they offered practical advice about Wyoming winters, ranch life, and where to find the best wildflowers come spring. By early evening, it was time for the newlyweds to depart for the ranch. Catherine changed from her wedding dress into a simple traveling outfit and found Henry waiting with the wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and a hand-painted sign that read, "Just married." The journey to what was now her home was filled with a comfortable silence, both of them absorbing the magnitude of the day's events. As they crossed the bridge over the creek, Henry pointed to a plume of smoke rising from the ranch house chimney. "Mrs. Garcia came out early to prepare the house," he explained. "She'll have left by now, giving us privacy, but there should be a hot meal waiting." The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Soon they would be truly alone together for the first time as husband and wife. The ranch looked different in the golden evening light, more welcoming, perhaps because Catherine now approached it as home rather than as a visitor. Henry helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Threshold tradition," he explained with a smile, carrying her up the porch steps and into the house. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. The rooms had been thoroughly cleaned, fresh wildflowers adorned the tables, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. Most noticeably, the curtains they had purchased hung at the windows, somehow hemmed and hung in their absence. "The town ladies," Henry explained, seeing her surprise. "They must have worked all night to finish them." Catherine felt tears threaten again. Such kindness from people who barely knew her. Henry showed her to the master bedroom, where her trunk had already been delivered from town. The room had been transformed as well, fresh linens on the bed, curtains at the windows, even a homemade quilt laid across the foot of the bed. "A wedding gift from Mrs. Phillips," Henry said, nodding to the quilt. "She said every marriage needs warmth to weather Wyoming winters." Catherine touched the quilt's intricate pattern, overwhelmed by the thought that had gone into these preparations. "I'll give you some time," Henry said gently. "Join me for supper when you're ready. No rush." Alone in what was now their bedroom, Catherine unpacked her few possessions, hanging her dresses in the massive wardrobe that dwarfed her modest collection. In the bottom of her trunk, she found the letter she had written to Henry, confessing every detail of her deception. With sudden decision, she tore it into tiny pieces. There would be no more secrets between them, but neither did she need to itemize every falsehood. They had agreed to start fresh, and that's what she would do. Downstairs, she found Henry had laid out Mrs. Garcia's meal, a hearty stew, fresh bread, and a small cake decorated with sugar flowers. He had also opened a bottle of wine, a luxury Catherine hadn't expected. A wedding gift from Dr. Adams, Henry explained, from his private cellar. They ate together as husband and wife, their conversation easy despite the momentous change in their relationship. Henry spoke of his plans for the ranch, asking Catherine's opinion on everything from expanding the vegetable garden to redecorating the parlor. "This is your home now, too," he reminded her. "I want it to feel that way." After supper, they moved to the parlor, where Henry surprised her by producing a small wooden box. "A wedding gift," he said, handing it to her. "Nothing fancy, but practical." Inside, Catherine found a key ring with 3 keys. "For the house, the storeroom, and the strongbox," Henry explained. "Everything that's mine is now yours, too." The simple symbol of trust moved her deeply. "Thank you, Henry." As the evening grew late, tension began to build between them, the unspoken awareness of the night ahead. Catherine found herself growing increasingly nervous, twisting her new wedding ring around her finger. Henry noticed her anxiety. "Catherine," he said gently, "I meant what I said yesterday. I won't demand what can only be freely given. If you'd prefer, I can sleep in one of the other bedrooms until you're comfortable with more." His consideration touched her deeply. "That's not necessary," she said softly. "I'm nervous but not unwilling." He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "Then let's retire. It's been a long day." They readied for bed with careful courtesy, Henry giving her privacy to change into her nightgown before joining her. In the lamplight, Catherine saw that, beneath his calm exterior, her husband was as nervous as she. "We have time," he said, sitting beside her on the bed. "All the time we need to learn each other." His words eased the last of her tension. Slowly, hesitantly, Catherine reached for him, her hand finding his cheek. "I want to be a good wife to you, Henry." "You already are," he whispered, leaning forward to kiss her. What followed was a gentle discovery, tentative at first but growing in confidence as they found their way together. Henry was patient and tender, guiding but never pushing, and Catherine found herself responding with an openness that surprised her. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through their new curtains, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace. They had much still to learn about each other, challenges to face, and a life to build. But in that moment, she knew with certainty that her deception had led her, paradoxically, to a place of truth. "What are you thinking?" Henry murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. Catherine smiled in the darkness. "That sometimes the wrong path can lead to the right destination." He pulled her closer. "Then I'm glad you found your way here." "So am I," she whispered. "So am I." The days that followed settled into a rhythm as Catherine adapted to life as a rancher's wife. Each morning brought new challenges, learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove, figuring out how to manage the household accounts, and gradually making the big house feel like home. Henry was patient with her inexperience, never comparing her to the accomplished woman her references had promised. Instead, he seemed genuinely delighted by her small successes: the first loaf of bread that didn't burn, the vegetable garden beginning to flourish under her care, the curtains she sewed for the upstairs bedrooms. A month after the wedding, they hosted their first dinner party, inviting the ranch hands to join them at the main house. Catherine had been nervous about entertaining, but the men's appreciation for her simple cooking a roast with vegetables from her garden made her anxiety fade. "Mrs. Irwin," Joaquin said, using her married name with respect, "this is the best meal we've had at the Circle I since Henry's mother was alive." Henry beamed with pride. "Didn't I tell you she'd transform the place?" By midsummer, Catherine had indeed transformed the ranch house. Fresh paint brightened the parlor, wildflowers appeared regularly in mason jars throughout the rooms, and the kitchen became a warm heart of the home rather than just a functional space. More importantly, she and Henry were learning each other. Their initial awkwardness gave way to growing comfort, and comfort blossomed into genuine affection. Catherine found herself watching for Henry's return when he rode out with the hands, missing his presence beside her at night when he had to stay with the herd during calving season. It wasn't all smooth. Their first real argument came in late August when Catherine discovered Henry had hidden a letter from the bank requesting an early payment on their loan. "You promised honesty," she confronted him, hurt by the omission. "I didn't want to worry you," Henry defended himself. "We'll make the payment. The cattle prices are good this year." "That's not the point," Catherine insisted. "We're partners, remember? You can't protect me from reality." The disagreement simmered for 2 days before Henry finally came to her in the garden, hat in hand. "You were right," he admitted. "No more secrets, even well-intentioned ones. From now on, we face everything together, good or bad." Their reconciliation was sweet, and Catherine realized that the ability to disagree, to hurt each other, but to find their way back to understanding, was perhaps the true foundation of marriage. The conflict with Victor Caldwell continued to simmer as well. In September, 2 of Henry's cattle were found shot near the creek that formed their property boundary. Though everyone suspected Caldwell's men, there was no proof. "He's trying to provoke me," Henry told Catherine as they discussed the incident over dinner. "If I retaliate, he'll use it as an excuse to escalate." "What does he really want?" Catherine asked. "The water rights are valuable, but I think it's more than that now." Henry's expression was grim. "It's become personal. He can't stand that I've refused to sell, that the Circle I is thriving despite his efforts." "And now you have a wife," Catherine added thoughtfully, "while he remains alone." Henry looked surprised. "You think he's jealous?" "Perhaps." Catherine remembered Caldwell's cold eyes at their first meeting. There's something empty about him, all that wealth and power but no one to share it with. The harassment continued through the fall fences mysteriously cut, cattle driven off Circle I land, and increasingly hostile encounters in town. Henry maintained his restraint, but Catherine could see the toll it was taking on him. In early October, matters came to a head when Caldwell filed a formal complaint with the territorial authorities, claiming Henry had diverted water illegally from the creek. "It's nonsense," Henry fumed as they read the official letter. "We've never touched the natural flow." "He's counting on the authorities being too distant to investigate properly," Catherine reasoned. "Or perhaps he has influence with them." "What he doesn't count on is that the land office has the original surveys," Henry said. "But it will take time to request them, and meanwhile, we're under suspicion." The situation grew worse when Caldwell began spreading rumors in town about the Circle I's financial stability, making it difficult for Henry to secure credit at the general store or arrange cattle sales. Catherine found herself increasingly angry at the injustice. One afternoon, while Henry was meeting with their remaining loyal buyers in town, she made a decision. Donning her best dress, the blue one she'd been married, and she hitched the wagon herself and drove to the Lazy Sea Ranch. The grand house that came into view made the Circle I look modest by comparison, but Catherine wasn't intimidated. She'd faced worse than Victor Caldwell in her life. A surprised housekeeper showed her into Caldwell's study, where the rancher himself sat behind an imposing desk. "Mrs. Irwin," he greeted her, not bothering to rise. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Mr. Caldwell," Catherine replied, remaining standing despite his gesture toward a chair. "I'll be brief. Your campaign against my husband and our ranch stops now." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Campaign?" "I'm merely protecting my interests." "You're engaged in a personal vendetta," Catherine countered, "and I want to understand why." Something flickered in Caldwell's eyes, surprise perhaps at her directness. "Your husband refuses to acknowledge reality. The Circle I is too small to survive independently. Eventually, it will become part of the Lazy Sea, as it should have years ago when I made his father a generous offer." "So this is about Henry's father refusing to sell." Caldwell's mouth tightened. "James Irwin was a stubborn fool. His son is cut from the same cloth. Or perhaps," Catherine suggested, "they simply understood the value of what they built. Not everything has a price, Mr. Caldwell." "Every man has his breaking point," Caldwell replied coldly. "Henry will reach his, especially with a wife to consider." "Eastern women aren't built for hardship, Mrs. Irwin," Catherine smiled thinly. "You know nothing about me, Mr. Caldwell. I may have come from the East, but I'm made of stronger stuff than you imagine." She leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk. "I came here today to give you fair warning. Continue your harassment, and I'll personally ensure that every resident of Wheatland knows exactly what kind of man you are, not the respected rancher, but the petty tyrant who shoots his neighbors' cattle and cuts their fences in the night." Caldwell's face darkened. "You have no proof." "I don't need it," Catherine replied calmly. "People in town already suspect. They just need someone willing to say it aloud." She straightened. "Think carefully about the legacy you're creating, Mr. Caldwell. Is this really how you want to be remembered?" Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked out, her heart pounding but her head high. Henry was furious when he learned where she'd gone. "He could have hurt you," he exclaimed, pacing their bedroom that night. "Caldwell isn't a man to be crossed, especially not on his own property." "He wouldn't dare," Catherine assured him, "not when the entire town would know exactly who was responsible." She caught his hand as he passed. "Henry, someone needed to confront him directly. He's used to intimidating people, not being intimidated." "And you think you intimidated Victor Caldwell?" Henry asked incredulously. "I think I surprised him," Catherine replied. "Sometimes that's enough to make a man like that reconsider." Whether it was Catherine's visit or mere coincidence, the harassment diminished in the weeks that followed. Caldwell withdrew his complaint with the territorial authorities, claiming it had been a misunderstanding, and the town rumors about the Circle I's finances mysteriously ceased. By Christmas, Life had settled into a peaceful routine. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Henry surprised Catherine with a small piano, not the grand instrument Caldwell had mentioned, but a modest upright ordered from Denver. "I know you can't play like a conservatory graduate," he teased, "but I thought you might enjoy learning, and we can have music in the house again." Catherine's first halting attempts at Silent Night had them both laughing, but by New Year's she could manage a recognizable version of the carol. Their first Christmas dinner as a married couple was a community affair, with the ranch hands joining them at the big table Henry's father had built. Catherine had spent days preparing, baking pies and roasting a goose Mr. Bailey had specially ordered for her. As they sat around the table, Henry raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said simply, his eyes meeting Catherine's with warm meaning. That night, as they lay together in their bedroom, Catherine shared her suspicion that their family might soon be growing. "I can't be certain yet," she cautioned, watching Henry's face carefully, "but I've missed my monthly time twice now." The joy that spread across Henry's features was answer enough, but his whispered, "Really?" And the gentle way his hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach confirmed his happiness. "Really," she confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "If I'm right, we should welcome a child by summer." Henry gathered her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I could be this happy, Catherine. When I sent that advertisement east, I was hoping for a practical arrangement, a partnership. I never expected this." "What's this?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Love," he said simply. "I love you, Catherine Irwin. Not for your accomplishments or your background, but for your heart." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too, Henry, more than I thought possible when I stepped off that stagecoach." By February, Catherine's condition was confirmed, and the news spread quickly through Wheatland. The town women rallied around her, offering advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and endless support. Even Mrs. Phillips, who had been somewhat reserved since the piano recital revelation, became a frequent visitor, bringing her expertise as a mother of 4. In March, as Catherine entered her 4th month of pregnancy, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Circle I. Catherine was in the garden, planning the spring planting, when she heard a wagon approaching. Looking up, she was shocked to see Victor Caldwell himself driving toward the house. Henry was in town for supplies, leaving Catherine alone except for Tom, who was mending a fence nearby. She straightened, one hand instinctively moving to her slightly rounded belly. Caldwell pulled his wagon to a stop and descended with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Mrs. Irwin," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Caldwell," Catherine acknowledged, wary but curious. "This is unexpected." "Yes, I imagine it is." He looked uncomfortable, his usual arrogance replaced by something almost like uncertainty. "I've come to speak with you and your husband about a proposition." "Henry isn't here," Catherine informed him, "but I can send for him if it's urgent." Caldwell shook his head. "Perhaps it's better this way. What I have to say might be easier without him present initially." Catherine regarded him suspiciously. "I'm listening." Caldwell drew a deep breath. "I've received an offer from a cattle syndicate in Chicago. They want to establish a major operation in the territory and have made me an extremely generous offer for the Lazy C. You're selling." Catherine couldn't hide her surprise. "I'm considering it," he corrected. "My physician has advised a change of climate for my health. Wyoming winters have become challenging." Catherine noticed for the first time the grayish pallor beneath Caldwell's tan, the slight tremor in his hands. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and meant it. "But what does this have to do with us? The syndicate is only interested if they can secure water rights for the entire operation." Caldwell met her eyes directly. "They want the Circle I Creek as part of the deal." Catherine's guard went up immediately. "The creek isn't for sale, Mr. Caldwell. Henry would never, not the land," Caldwell interrupted. "Just a formal water-sharing agreement legally binding on all future owners. In exchange..." He paused. "In exchange, they're prepared to offer a substantial payment and cancel the bank note currently held against your property." Catherine stared at him, stunned. "You purchased our loan from the bank," Caldwell had the grace to look somewhat abashed, "several months ago." I intended it as leverage, I admit, but circumstances have changed. Why the change of heart? Catherine asked bluntly. Caldwell was silent for a long moment, looking past her to the mountains on the horizon. When a doctor tells you your time may be limited, it has a way of clarifying priorities. He met her gaze again. I've spent years fighting with neighbors over land and water when I could have been building something meaningful. Now it may be too late for that. The vulnerability in his admission caught Catherine off guard. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Caldwell. Victor, he corrected quietly, and your sympathy is more than I deserve after my behavior. His eyes dropped to her midsection. I understand congratulations are in order, Catherine nodded, instinctively protective. Yes, this summer, something like regret crossed Caldwell's face. Family was never in my calculations. Another miscalculation, it seems. He straightened, returning to business. The syndicate's lawyers will draw up fair terms for the water rights. Your husband would be wise to consider them carefully. I'll tell him, Catherine promised. Caldwell nodded, then turned to leave before pausing. Mrs. Irwin, Catherine, what you said to me that day in my study, you were right, about the legacy I was creating. A hint of his old wry smile appeared. It takes courage to confront a man on his own territory. Your husband is fortunate in his choice of wife. With that, he returned to his wagon and drove away, leaving Catherine stunned by the encounter. When Henry returned and heard about Caldwell's visit, his initial reaction was skepticism. It could be another trick, he warned. Caldwell isn't a man who changes overnight. It wasn't overnight, Catherine pointed out, and he's ill, Henry. I could see it clearly. Even so, we should proceed carefully. They did, engaging Wheatland's only lawyer to review the syndicate's proposal when it arrived the following week. The terms were surprisingly favorable. The Circle, I would retain full ownership of the creek on their property, but agree to certain usage limitations that would ensure adequate flow downstream. In exchange, their bank loan would be fully satisfied, and they would receive a cash payment substantial enough to expand their herd significantly. It's fair, the lawyer confirmed. More than fair, actually. I'd recommend accepting. After much consideration, Henry agreed. The water-sharing agreement was signed in April, with Victor Caldwell present as a surprisingly cordial witness. The hostility that had characterized their relationship for years seemed to have faded, replaced by a cautious mutual respect. As they left the lawyer's office, Caldwell took Henry aside for a private word. Catherine couldn't hear what was said, but Henry's expression softened visibly during the brief conversation. What did he say to you? She asked as they rode home. Henry was quiet for a moment. He apologized, he said finally, for everything, the harassment, the rumors, even for how he treated my father years ago. Henry shook his head in wonder. Never thought I'd see the day Victor Caldwell would humble himself to anyone. People can surprise you, Catherine observed, thinking of her own transformation from desperate deceiver to contented wife. That they can, Henry agreed, reaching across the wagon seat to take her hand. The Chicago syndicate took possession of the Lazy Sea in May, and Victor Caldwell departed for a sanatorium in Colorado, his health visibly declining. Before leaving, he made one final gesture that shocked the entire community. He donated his grand house to be used as Wheatland's first proper hospital, with funds for a doctor's salary for 5 years. Trying to buy his way into heaven, some cynics muttered. But Catherine, remembering the regret in his eyes that day in her garden, thought it might be something more genuine, a man facing his mortality and attempting, however late, to leave something worthwhile behind. Summer brought increasing heat, and Catherine's increasing discomfort as her pregnancy advanced. Henry became increasingly protective, hiring a local girl to help with household chores and limiting Catherine's activities despite her protests. I'm pregnant, not invalid, she reminded him regularly, though she secretly appreciated his concern. In late July, as Catherine entered her final month of pregnancy, Henry surprised her with one more gift, a letter from Eliza in Boston, forwarded through a series of addresses until it reached Wheatland. How did you find her? Catherine asked, clutching the precious link to her past. Wrote to the address on the references, Henry admitted. It took some doing. She'd moved twice, but I thought you might want news from home. The letter contained joyful news. Eliza had married a kind widower with 2 young children and was happier than she'd ever expected to be. She wrote of Boston gossip, including the delicious information that the shop owner's son who had accused Catherine of theft had himself been caught embezzling and was now thoroughly disgraced. Justice comes eventually, Henry observed when Catherine shared this detail. Sometimes life itself is justice, she replied, thinking of how her desperate deception had led to genuine happiness, while Caldwell's wealth and power had left him alone at the end. On August 12, 1878, after 18 hours of labor that left Henry pacing the porch in helpless anxiety, Catherine gave birth to a healthy son. They named him James Thomas Irwin James for Henry's father and Thomas for Catherine's. Holding their son between them in the bed where they had begun their life together, Catherine marveled at how completely her world had transformed in just over a year. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "That sometimes the most beautiful truths grow from desperate falsehoods," she replied, smiling up at him. "I came to you with forged letters and a heart full of fear. And I got the greatest blessing of my life," Henry completed, leaning down to kiss her tenderly. "I told you then, and it's even more true now, I don't need references or accomplishments. I only need to know your heart, Catherine. You have it," she promised. "You and James have all of it forever." As the summer faded into a golden Wyoming autumn, the Circle I Ranch flourished. The bank loan paid off. Henry invested in expanding their herd and improving their breeding stock. The garden Catherine had reclaimed yielded a bountiful harvest, and the house once a bachelor's afterthought became a true home, filled with the laughter of friends and the cries of their infant son. In October, they hosted the Harvest Social for the entire community, opening the ranch to neighbors from miles around. Catherine, now recovered from childbirth, moved confidently among their guests, no longer afraid of being exposed as an imposter. She had earned her place in Wheatland not through accomplishments listed in forged references, but through her character, revealed day by day in how she lived and loved. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Henry found her on the porch, watching their guests dance to fiddle music in the yard. "Happy?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Catherine leaned against him, breathing in the scent of hay and horses that she'd come to associate with home. "Completely," she answered. "Are you?" Henry's smile was answer enough, but he added, "More than I ever dreamed possible when I posted that advertisement. I asked for a respectable lady and got a remarkable woman instead." "With very suspicious references," Catherine reminded him with a laugh. "The best kind," Henry declared, pulling her close. "Perfect references might have brought me a perfect stranger, but your imperfect ones brought me the perfect wife." Inside the house, their son began to cry, and Catherine moved to go to him. Henry caught her hand, pulling her back for a kiss that still made her heart race after more than a year of marriage. "I love you, Catherine Irwin," he whispered against her lips. "Reference letters and all, and I love you, Henry Irwin," she replied, for seeing past them to my heart. Their son's cries grew more insistent, and together they went inside to tend to him, leaving the music and laughter behind. In the nursery, Catherine lifted little James from his cradle, and Henry's arms encircled them both, a family built on truth that had grown from deception. Outside, the Wyoming night spread its starry canopy over the Circle I Ranch, over the creek that no longer divided but now united neighboring properties, over the town of Wheatland, where a young woman from Boston had found unexpected welcome, and over the graves of those who had come before Henry's parents, who had built the foundation upon which their son now constructed his future. Life would bring challenges, still harsh winters, dry summers, the endless work of a cattle ranch, and the joys and sorrows of family. But Catherine faced the future without fear, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with a man who had asked not for her credentials but for her heart, and who cherished what he had found there.